Hey you! Yes, you, watching this video. Do you want to own a piece of Scribbler? Only not a lock of hair or blood or flesh or anything else that will get you in trouble with the law? Well, now you can, with t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags and mugs featuring Obab Scribbler at her Teespring store. You know you want to. I shall now stop talking in third person and send you on to the video. Be lovely to each other and enjoy the show!
Ponytails. Read by Scribbler.
After years of friendship, after years of work and fun along the way, the Cutie Mark Crusaders finally discovered their true destinies, to help ponies get their cutie marks. Yet the marks on their flanks symbolized that they would forever be friends. They would never fall apart. Even after fights they had, they would always come back to each other. Even after spending the day without each other, they would always come running back. They felt an ache, an aching pain, something in their heads that told them, whispered to them, to stay together. They did, having many good laughs and many good times, helping others and helping each other. But when they were apart, they felt sick. They felt that pain return, and the longer they were apart, the stronger it became. The more their legs felt weak, and the more their heads felt heavy. They spent more and more time together as they knew about the pains. But at night, slumbering in their beds, the fillies would become afraid. They would whisper in their minds to each other. Scootaloo would ask for her only true family to return, the ones who were like sisters to her. Just the same for them all. They felt like sisters, like a family.
I miss you guys.
I know, Scootaloo. Do you ever get that feeling?
What feeling? Are you talking about the pains? You feel them too?
Whenever we're apart.
It just doesn't make sense, y'all. I felt them after getting our cutie marks. The pain is worse. It's bad. I'm farther away from both of you. It's real bad. Applejack gave me medication for the pain, but it's not helping.
We do this every night. We'll see each other in the morning. Just go to the clubhouse right away.
Good night. See you soon.
But soon, Applebloom's pain worsened until she couldn't stay away anymore. She ran through the darkness, her vision blurred and her legs burning. She didn't have to look to see where she was going. She could sense Sweetie Belle's presence as she neared Carousel Boutique. Sweetie Belle woke in a start, sitting up and knowing Applebloom was near. She felt her get closer and closer in every second, and the pain in her joints became lesser. She hopped out of her bed to get to the door to greet her midnight guest. She opened the door before Applebloom even knocked on it, and gasped when she saw her friend. Applebloom was missing her usual bright bow, her hair messy and tangled. Pouring from her eyes and mouth were not tears and saliva, but blood. Her sunset orange eyes had lost their sparkle, had reddened from the stress and pain she had endured. Her breaths were ragged and heavy. Sweetie grabbed her and took her inside, putting a white hoof around her friend.
What happened?
Instead of speaking out loud, Applebloom spoke through her mind directly to Sweetie Belle, shutting off her conversation from Scootaloo so as not to disturb her in her sleep.
The pain was too much. It's gotten worse.
The Cutie Mark Crusaders spent more and more time together. They never questioned the mind link, sometimes just huddling together in their clubhouse to relieve themselves from the pain. But after many weeks, Applejack made Applebloom come with her on an apple delivery. Applebloom refused to go. Applejack put her in the cart, and Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle watched their friend get farther and farther away, tears streaming down her face as she yelled for Applejack to stop.
No more whining, you hear?
The two fillies felt an ache in their stomachs and their legs growing weak as Applebloom and Applejack disappeared into the woods. They were gone for 2 days. 2 agonizing days as hours and hours went by. The two's pain grew stronger. Word got back that Applebloom had gotten into severe pain too and been hospitalized at wherever they had been delivering. They could hear Applebloom screaming for help in their minds, telling the nurse that medication would not help, that she needed to see her friends. The two fillies had grown more tired and weak, and rushed through the forest, searching and searching for the place, feeling, sensing that they were getting closer to her, their missing piece. They discovered a small town beyond the forest, finding the hospital and rushing inside. Already their pain had gone down increasingly, and their heartbeats slowed. They asked for Applebloom's room, and found Applejack pacing outside the door in the clean white hallway of the hospital. Above her, the light flickered, and her face was nervous and pale.
Scootaloo? Sweetie Belle? What are y'all doing here?
Helping Applebloom!
Scootaloo cried, forcing the door open and rushing in with Sweetie Belle. The door shut, and the nurse looked up from her clipboard.
I'm sorry, who are you? Friends? Family? You should have told us you were coming to visit.
Friends!
They said at the same time.
Okay, well...
Applebloom suddenly sat up, gasping for air and coughing. Her face was covered in blood, and it only smeared when she rubbed her cheek.
Girls!
She was suddenly filled with energy and joy at the sight of her friends. The pain that had been bothering them all day had faded at their close proximity. The nurse gasped.
But how? You were unconscious. You were going to die. I'll get the doctor. Stay here.
She rushed out of the room. She shut the door, and the three friends were left alone together.
Applebloom, are you okay?
Sweetie asked. Applebloom nodded.
It feels bad. It seems like we had to stay closer than ever now.
She said worriedly.
Over time, it's gotten worse the farther apart we are.
Sweetie said, shaking her head in confusion. She gripped onto a tissue with her magic and brought it to Applebloom's face, wiping off the blood. Applebloom looked down.
But we can't be together all the time.
We can't.
Scootaloo added.
We won't be able to be with any pony else. If this continues to the point where we can't even be 10 feet apart.
What if...
Sweetie Belle said.
What if I don't want to be with any pony else?
Scootaloo and Applebloom looked at each other. Their desires to be together were strong, but they couldn't believe Sweetie Belle. It sounded as if she didn't want to spend time with her own sister.
But I have to become a better flyer. Rainbow Dash is going to help me. I can't skip that.
Tears welled in Scootaloo's eyes, and every pony began to worry.
Come on, Scootaloo!
Rainbow Dash yelled encouragement, but even though she knew Scootaloo was a weak flyer, she had seemed weaker than normal. Scootaloo's body was tired. She could barely flap her wings. She was separated from her friends. Even though she loved Rainbow Dash, the pony she had looked up to for years, she felt a sudden desire to abandon her. Scootaloo did not want to be here. She felt no care for Rainbow Dash any longer. She did not want Rainbow in her life anymore. She only wanted her friends. She only wanted to fulfill her destiny. That was what her Cutie Mark whispered to her. That was what it told her. It told her that she hated Rainbow Dash. Scootaloo stopped flapping her wings, bloody tears filling her eyes as her desire to be with her friends greatened. Her separation from her friends caused her physical and emotional pain, and she lashed out.
I don't need you. You aren't helping me. I will never fly, and I accept that! Just get away from me!
Scootaloo landed and ran towards Sweet Apple Acres, the pain fading slowly as she sensed Apple Bloom and headed toward her.
Apple Bloom! Where is Sweetie Belle?
She's with Rarity. I reckon a Sister's Day. But she's been talking to me and doesn't sound too happy to be anywhere near Rarity.
Did they have a fight?
No.
I can hear you two! Get me out of here! Rarity is being annoying! She won't let me be with you girls today!
She doesn't understand us. She never will.
The same happened with Rainbow and I. She wanted to help me. She was only separating us. Do you think they're trying to cause us pain?
Girls, we can't just...
I think they know! I hate Rarity!
Scootaloo arrived at Sweet Apple Acres to find Apple Bloom awaiting her arrival. They hugged, and Apple Bloom asked her to go to the clubhouse. Scootaloo nodded in agreement. She noticed blood dripping down her friend's face, and when she felt her own cheek, she felt warm, sticky blood on her own face. Scared at how common it had become at this point, now it not only came from their faces and sometimes mouths, but now their ears and nostrils too. Apple Bloom and Scootaloo sat in the clubhouse, waiting for Sweetie Belle to come.
Hurry up, Sweetie Belle!
I'm almost there!
Scootaloo looked up at Apple Bloom.
I think we should stay here for a while. When Sweetie gets back, we can stock up on food and get blankets.
Apple Bloom nodded.
We are not leaving the clubhouse for a long while.
Sweetie Belle entered. More blood than all of them combined was on her face, her coat, her hooves.
Sweetie! Belle?
Scootaloo asked, as if she couldn't recognize the pony under all the red. Sweetie Belle's breathing was heavy, and her bright green eyes glinted disturbingly rather than her usual cheerful look. Her teeth were grit angrily.
Rarity isn't dead! At least I don't think so.
You heard her?
Apple Bloom asked in surprise.
She would not stop going on and on! Talking and talking! Oh, sweetie! Do look at this gorgeous dress! I've been wanting to punch her in the muzzle for a long time!
That doesn't sound like you.
Scootaloo scooted away from the door and Sweetie.
You know what I said earlier! They know, Scootaloo! They want to cause as much pain to us as possible! They're doing this, girls! Our own families have betrayed us! Tormented us! Why shouldn't we give them a taste of their own medicine?
Scootaloo thought for a moment. It didn't make sense, and yet it did make sense in a way. Another part of her, a small part of her, screamed that it still didn't make sense, but it had to be true. Why else would she have said those things to Rainbow Dash? Sweetie Belle was her friend. Apple Bloom was her friend. They cared about nothing else now. No pony else now. They went into Apple Bloom's home, wandering through the halls close together. Apple Bloom pointed in one room.
I know there are sheets in a closet in here. You girls look in that room for other stuff we might need.
She walked in, and Sweetie and Scootaloo walked down the hall to the other room. But when they stepped in, they heard ringing in their ears and blood spilling out. They covered their ears, pulling them down, running back to Apple Bloom. Apple Bloom lay on the floor, blood flowing from her ears, her mouth, her eyes. Her expression was unfocused, and froth bubbled up her throat, like she was some wild animal. She gulped, standing back and looking at the girls, her eyes bloodshot and teary.
Let's search together.
They eventually grabbed food, blankets, and other things they may need, going into the clubhouse and locking it shut. Dropping everything on the floor, they sighed in unison. Scootaloo closed all the curtains, pointing out that it was already getting late. They laid out 3 blankets and slept on them for the night. Sunlight leaked through the small openings through the curtains, blinding Apple Bloom when her eyes opened. She felt like she had barely slept. She looked at the other girls, looked around the room, barely remembering where she was and the events of yesterday. She rubbed her eyes and yawned, but when she took her hooves away from her eyes, they came back smeared with fresh blood.
But why? We're all in the same room together. This shouldn't be happening.
Applebloom looked at her sleeping friends, noticing that they too had blood coming from every opening. They were spread out through the room. Did that mean they had to be closer than ever now? She began to panic. It felt like the walls were closing in on them, pushing them together. She felt claustrophobic. She needed fresh air. She took a deep breath in and unlocked the door quickly, running outside and falling to the bright green grass in pain, gasping for the fresh, sweet morning air. Her ears rang and her vision blurred even as she drank the air in. She could barely feel the 2 sets of hooves on her, picking her up and setting her back down in the clubhouse. Once there, her vision quickly cleared up. The blood stopped flowing out as the 2 young fillies kept their hooves on her.
We can't leave.
Sweetie Belle coughed up bloody phlegm.
We have to stay together. And now... we really can't leave each other's sides.
She sat down, looking at the floor, tears and blood mixing and falling down her face. They all sat down together, looking at one another, holding hooves. Scootaloo looked around the room, and her eye caught on what she was looking for. She gestured, and the other 2 followed rather closer than normal to stand. Sitting atop a box was a shiny knife.
Grabbed it when we were in the kitchen,
Scootaloo said, sliding her hoof across the shiny surface, looking up at them.
I have an idea. We have to stick together, right? What if we each take a piece of us?
She slid the knife over her leg without hesitating. If she felt pain, she wasn't showing it. Maybe leaking so much blood had inured her to it. She sliced off a thin piece of skin, watching a thin trickle of blood down her leg.
And stay together.
She pressed the thin flesh to Applebloom's chest, and Applebloom held it there. Applebloom and Sweetie Belle looked at Scootaloo with sudden hope and curiosity, a hunger to finally be free of the pain. Applebloom put Scootaloo's flesh on her back, blood dripping down and staining her light coat. She snatched the knife from Scootaloo's hoof and cut her own leg quickly. Too quickly. She cut off a bigger chunk than she meant to. She cringed, trying to contain herself and the fresh pain. She wasn't as brave as Scootaloo, it seemed. It showed in her face. It wasn't terrible. They had all gotten so used to pain in general that they hardly felt that anymore. But cutting deep into her own leg still hurt like fire and pierced through the dull throbbing she was used to. She cut off another smaller piece from another leg, this time a hind leg, carefully cutting this time, and handed the knife to Sweetie Belle, who grasped it in her light green magic. Sweetie, almost gracefully, cut off 2 chunks of her own flesh, the first from her leg, the second one she decided to be more creative.
I like doing pretty designs. Maybe I'll just...
She dug the knife into her chest, and the others watched curiously as she cut a crudely shaped heart, meeting the cut where she started. She cried out in pain and joy as she dug it out, leaving a heart-shaped bloody gash in her chest. She gasped, tears and blood pouring down her cheeks, but a smile slowly spreading across her face.
It's a pretty heart.
She choked out between heavy breaths and gasps. Her voice was raspy and pained. She gave the heart to Applebloom, who took it hesitantly, but tried to look grateful with a fake smile of her own. Sweetie smiled back. Hers was in no way fake. Scootaloo took the knife to cut off another part of her leg and gave it to Sweetie. They all now had a piece of each other. They continued to stay in the clubhouse. Carrying around each other's flesh had seemed to work well for a day, but no longer after that. They sat together, huddled on the floor, twitching and sobbing from the pain, spasmodically reaching out and grasping each other, whatever they could reach at the time. They had to be touching. Not nearby, not close, not even standing next to each other. touching, flesh on flesh. They had their hooves pressed together now. The pain was less, but it was still there, still throbbing. Applebloom felt that she had endured it the most. The other girls didn't know what she had been through. She had it the worst. At this point, all of them wanted to be together. They no longer cared for their families or any pony else. The only thing that mattered was each other. That little voice that whispered to them that they only needed each other, their cutie marks, to fulfill their destinies, their dreams, their purpose. The voice that made them hide when ponies came looking for them. The voices that made them run from their own flesh and blood. They didn't need their families. They just needed each other. Yet Applebloom knew she still felt something for her family, buried deep beneath the voice. Applejack. She wanted her sister. But all she needed was Sweetie and Scootaloo. She just wanted to be happy. They could not be like this forever. They could not stay like this. It wouldn't work. Applebloom felt an idea forming in her head. A terrible idea. One that made her sick, but at the same time appealed to her. She found herself eyeing the dried blood-encrusted knife once again. A sparkle returned to her eyes. Not a spark of joy which she had carried originally when the world was fresh and new and full of promise, but a different sparkle. A devious sparkle of hope. Blood stained the floor of the Cutie Mark Crusader clubhouse. A knife emerging from a lifeless white corpse. The body of a young Pegasus nearby, her bright purple eyes dead and cold. All the Cutie Mark Crusaders were gathered here. All their bodies were here. But only one lived. All of them cold and empty, drained of any feeling, any life or rational thought. The earth pony dropped the knife. She still felt a burning desire to be close to them. She still felt blood pouring from every opening as she stepped away. She still felt the dull, throbbing pain. Her ears rang and her vision blurred. She could barely walk from the deep cuts in her legs, but what she could see were the stallions on the train tracks, the colors of what she recognized as the train. A loud whistle screamed in her ears, not only the scream of the train, but the screams of her friends, who were now beyond the grave. Yet they still screamed in her mind, speaking to her, begging with her, pleading, screaming in agony and pain, asking why she had killed them. They now lived within her head. They were forever connected, and it would stay that way even after death. Nothing could separate them. Their cutie marks had decreed it so. They had journeyed and tried so hard for so many years, working toward their goal to discover their destinies. But in the end, those destinies, their own achievements, had killed them, slowly destroying them, ripping them apart while keeping them together. The walls closed in on them until one of them inevitably snapped, unable to handle the torture further. That young mare's gaze left the track, and she looked up slowly to smile and greet the bright light of the oncoming train.